All right, well, welcome everyone to the Retire Ready podcast. I'm David Nicholas here with Aaron Jones, our CPA and financial planner, and we're back for another week.
Feels good to be back, David.
I've lost count. You've done so many of these podcasts.
We've just been rolling.
I don't even know the number anymore.
Excited to be able to talk to you today.
Yeah. So it should be good. If you're listening to us, you obviously can't see what's on the screen behind us. But if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook, we've got this glaring picture of the U.S. national debt. It is staggering. So today's show, we're going to talk about the national debt.
It's a pretty ugly chart, David.
It is. It's really ugly. It's painful to look at that. I mean, I didn't even know there was that many commas available to put in a budget. So we're going to talk about the national debt. Number one, why is it important? I know it's somewhat depressing to talk about, but we're going to talk to why is it important, and also what does it really mean for Americans? What does it mean for retirees? What does it mean for the future? If you're someone that's 30 years old today or 35 years old, what does that mean for Social Security for you 30 years from now? And so we're going to talk through some of those issues today, but I do want to start with just what's happened in the last month. So we recently had a debt ceiling debacle, you could call it in the most politest way. Do you just want to give us a recap of the debt ceiling? Obviously, what happened, where we're at now on the other side of that? This just happened a little over a month ago.
Yeah. So you guys are all familiar. Remember, as we approach debt ceiling, basically, our government has a debt ceiling to reach before basically we go into default, right? So credit rating goes down, certain treasury payments either don't get met or default on those treasury loans that our government's issued. And so about a month and a half ago, we were reaching that debt limit. If the government didn't extend it or come up with a plan to either reduce the debt down or basically give us a higher debt limit, our country would have gone into default.
And I think this has happened. This is not the first time this has happened. This happens every few years. This has been happening for 30 years. We get right up to the limit, and then all of a sudden Republicans and Democrats, they're fighting. They don't want to work together. Then magically, they figure out a way how to continue to raise the debt ceiling. And it's not figuring out a way necessary to pay for our bills. It's just saying that the government can take on more debt. And so this is what is just absolutely just mind-blowing. So I want to give out the exact number. So the federal debt has exploded by $1 trillion in 5 weeks since the debt ceiling deal, the new deal, became law. So total national debt, we've got it here on the screen, $32.4 trillion. So in 5 weeks, we've added $1 trillion of debt to our national debt just in that short period of time, which is interesting. If you just look at the U.S. national debt, so obviously we just said it's increased $1 trillion in 5 weeks, but if you looked at where the national debt on July 6th, which was just a couple of days ago, $32.4 trillion. Prior, on June 2nd, it was $31.4 trillion. So again, those numbers are just unbelievable to even really put the math behind. But when I look at this, we want to look at, well, what does that mean going forward? When President Biden took office, this was in January of 2021. From January 2021 until now, we've added $4.7 trillion to the debt. And it's easy to blame, obviously, the party in power, Democrats who hold the White House. But the debt issue is really a Republican and Democrat issue.
It's both.
Yeah.
We just spend too much.
Absolutely.
In a nutshell.
Absolutely. If you look at under President Trump, deficit spending. Under President Obama, there was deficit spending. Under President Bush, there was deficit spending. Yep. So it just seems like when our politicians get to Washington, we just can't figure out how to spend within our means, unfortunately.
Yep. You know? For the families out there, you guys have a budget, right? You go in, you know what you're going to spend monthly on bills, utilities, mortgages, car payments, maybe you got some loans, credit cards, all that. And you know, if you spend more than you're making, right, you got a deficit, and that's really what we're talking about today.
Yeah, right? That's exactly right. Well, there's a narrative out there, and you hear this quite a bit on, okay, David, it is what it is. We've got $32.5 trillion national debt, so we can't go backwards. We've got to pay for it somehow. So the question is, how do we pay for it? And one of the narratives is, well, just tax the top 1%. So first off, let's talk about who is this top 1%. So essentially, the top 1% are households that make above $435,000 a year. Obviously, that's sizable income. I think anyone would say if you're making $435,000 a year as a household, you're doing very well. But I will say there's a difference between a billionaire and someone making $435,000 a year.
Yeah.
There's a big difference between that.
Right.
You could be a working professional, both spouses working, and you could be getting very close to $435,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
You could be an attorney, you could be a physician, a doctor, and easily, especially if both husband and wife are working, you could be making well over $435,000 a year. Again, 99% of Americans don't make that amount of income, but there's quite a few Americans that do earn at that threshold of 1% or more per year. So, where would we have to take tax rates in order to balance the budget? And this is what's just so fascinating. And this is, if by our math, in order to achieve a balanced budget by 2025, ready for this? We would have to raise the top tax rate. It would require increasing the top individual tax rate, which, do you know what that top tax rate is?
Right now it's 37%.
37%. We would have to raise the top individual tax rate to 102% for those making over $400,000 a year just to get a balanced budget. So again, I know you said, well, David, let's just tax the rich. And I get it. They're making the most. Maybe they can afford to pay the most. Makes sense. But when you actually go and look at the numbers, we can't tax them enough. You would have to confiscate 100% of the income above $400,000 for Americans. You have to take, not even that, 102%. So you'd have to take more than what they make above $400,000, and that would just get us to stop adding more to the debt. It doesn't mean paying that off. It just means in order to stop adding more to our national debt, we would have to confiscate 100% of the income for those making above $400,000 in this country. And again, that affects both Republicans and Democrats. And there's just not enough wealthy Americans to do this.
Nope.
So unfortunately, here's the bad part. Who are they going after then in order to balance budgets?
It's really just your average everyday American, small businesses. That's where we've seen a lot of tax changes get proposed. It's really centered around those groups.
That's right. Because 99% of Americans make less than $400,000.
Yeah.
That is where the share of income is coming from.
Yeah.
More than 50% of revenues are coming from that 99% of Americans.
That's right.
Yeah. So I guess this is where I say, so if there's not enough income in the wealthy to cover all that our government spends, then it generally means that regular middle class Americans, hardworking Americans are gonna fit the bill. But again, we're talking about raising taxes on the middle class. And so when I look at that, and this is what is just so frustrating, is that, and I wrote this down because I saw this statistics. So I just want to read it to make sure that I hit it right. And here's what it is. It says, let's see, this is going to be by total interest on the national debt. Okay. By 2051, spending, so this is the interest that we pay on our debt. So by 2051, so what is that? Less than 30 years from now. Interest on our debt will be the single largest line item in the federal budget. As Americans, we will spend more every year on interest payments than we'll spend on Social Security, than we'll spend on Medicare, than we'll spend on Medicaid, and all other mandatory and discretionary spending programs. By 2053, interest will be our biggest line item of the budget. And I'll say that math just doesn't stink. It's really immoral what we've done to our kids and grandkids to really put this debt on them, unfortunately.
Yeah. And one would hope that our wonderful politicians in government would be looking at these projections and trying to figure out some solutions to reduce this down.
But how do you do it?
That's challenging. But a lot of times it's around tax changes.
Exactly.
Right.
So how do we get more revenue, or how do we balance budgets? There's only two ways to do it.
Yep. Taxes.
Or cut spending.
Cut spending.
Yeah.
That's not
happening.
happening.
Can't even think of it. Yeah. I can tell you.
They're not thinking about it.
They're not
So
thinking
I'm not
about
thinking
it. Federal, if you're like, don't hold your breath if we're thinking the federal government is ever going to cut spending. It's just not going to happen.
No.
I mean, every day they're figuring out ways that we can spend more money. I don't even want to go down that road because it's depressing. But the odds are our governments we're not going to cut spending. So we're going to raise taxes. And so this is, Aaron, obviously you being a CPA, this is something that for our clients at Nicholas Wealth Management, we look at how do we reduce or even can potentially eliminate a tax bill in retirement. But what are some of the things that you look at as far as looking at financial planning from really a tax standpoint?
Yeah, it's really something I have to watch pretty closely just because taxes is a big concern for our team. It's a big concern for our clients, right? And so with just really about every 4 years, there's some type of proposal at minimum or a new tax law change that's coming about, right? So we've already talked about a few on the show, excuse me. 2019, they passed the Secure Act, right, which pushed back required distribution age for all of your pre-tax retirement accounts, right? And it really changed the way the retirement accounts are inherited, right? So as you remember, now non-spouse beneficiaries have 10 years to fully deplete those IRAs, 401ks, pre-tax retirement accounts, and recognize all that taxable income.
So before, when you received a retirement account, so say a parent passed away, they had a $500,000 IRA account, you received it as a beneficiary, you could slowly pull that money out over the rest of your life.
You had the option to stretch it over your lifetime now. So instead of having to recognize at least $500,000 in 10 years, maybe you have a 40 or 50 year time horizon to be able to pull that out over time.
Slowly, so it reduces the taxes. But now that option is no longer.
That's right.
You've got to deplete that. So a $500,000 IRA account, you'd have to take out $50,000 a year, and that's all taxable income.
All taxable income.
Added to whatever tax bracket or rate
your wages, to your interest, to all that you're earning.
Yeah.
So that was a big one that, it gave tax planners more time because they did extend that required distribution age. But I don't think it's a net win for a lot of people pass on, that want to leave a large legacy to their beneficiaries, their kids, their grandkids. Really, I think penalizes them in taxes over time.
That's right.
There's a few different ones that have been proposed now. So again, these haven't been passed officially in a tax law yet, but there's some that are of higher consideration to think about right now. One's a new capital gain tax rate, right?
Okay.
So David, if you go buy a stock today and you wait a year to sell it, what's your capital gain tax rate?
15%.
Typically about 15%, right? If you recognize enough, it could be up to 20. If you recognize even more than that, you can add extra 3.8% net investment income tax. So upwards of 23.8%, right? Max capital gains tax rate. The proposal was to bump that up to 44%.
Which 44% tax rate, you make a profit, your max, and is that based on income? What the tax?
I'm sure there's there'll be a similar tier, but your top tax rate would be 44% for capital gains. So that would include stocks, that would include investment real estate, right, and businesses, right.
And so that obviously that has not gone through Congress.
It's not through Congress
but
yet.
I think the spirit of that shows the direction that law is headed.
Right.
It's not, the proposal is not how do we lower our taxes. The proposal is how do we raise taxes? How do we take capital gains tax from 15 or 20% to a 40% capital gains tax?
I want to remember, so Trump came in 2017, did a Trump Tax Cuts Job Act, right? Lowered tax rates for today. We've been talking, taxes are the lowest they've been in about 40 or 50 years, right? I think it was really a big win for most taxpayers, his Tax Cuts and Job Act, right?
So if you're a young family and you're raising kids, you may be shocked the amount of money that goes out of your paycheck. You may be someone that's approaching retirement and you look at your paycheck and realize how much is going in taxes. Here's the shocking part. The taxes that you're paying today are really some of the lowest taxes that we've seen in 50 years. Like Aaron, you just said this, in 2017, we lowered taxes. So as frustrating as it is to see so much of our paychecks go out the door for taxes, I just want to make sure we're clear on this. This is actually a low tax rate environment. The lowest taxes have been in almost 50 years. So the odds are what you're paying in taxes right now is probably the lowest that you'll see probably in our lifetime, because these tax cuts expire
2025.
Right.
And that was the downside, right? To get this act through, he had to add an asterisk to those tax cuts because they're going to end in 2025. So really, you've got 3 more tax years with these tax rates. New administration can come in next year and change that. That's a pretty quick turnaround to get a bill passed. So I'm not expecting for that to happen. So I'm expecting us to revert back to where we were in 2017.
So this just reminds me of Dave Chappelle, which obviously he can be pretty controversial on how, but there was this skit that he was doing, and it was talking about when Barack Obama became President Obama, and he was like, all of my friends, they're like, oh no, sorry, this is when President Trump became president after Barack Obama. And he said all of his friends were like, oh, this Trump's coming in office. Like, I'm heading out. I'm out. I'm leaving the country. And Dave Chappelle was like, you know what? I think I'm going to stick around a little bit and just see how this tax cut works out for me.
Sure.
Because he was like, fast forward 8 years earlier, he goes, I had just made it big. He was like, this is the first time in my life where I actually made some money. My comedy show was going well. My TV show was going well. And he said the most unlikely thing happened. He was like, president of the first African-American president became president. And what was his agenda? To raise taxes. And he just was, he's like, the irony of it was he had generally been a Democrat. But then he was like, the moment that he actually became successful, that he actually created wealth and he actually created income, he said, wait a second. Now's the time that I got to give up half of what I make when I finally just accumulated this wealth. And so the irony is, it's not, you hate to get to political on it, but this is why elections do matter.
They do.
This is why you could be a diehard, bleeding heart liberal, but at the end of the day, there's two schools of thought when it comes to policy, when it comes to law. And generally speaking, Republicans or conservatives attempt to lower taxes, whereas Democrats generally will fight for higher taxes, and to be fair, generally on the highest wage earners. And that's a caveat that Democrats will make is, hey, we don't want to raise taxes on the middle class or lower income. We want to raise tax on higher wage earners. And in some ways, I agree with that. Look, I'm a freedom-loving American, and I don't want to pay more than what we have to. But if anyone's going to pay taxes, well, maybe the wealthy can afford to pay more. But the challenge is the math just doesn't work out that way.
No,
and there's just not enough. And this is why, going back to what we were talking about earlier, is that there's just not enough income at the top 1% bracket to pay for what we have to pay for.
Right.
So let's talk through entitlements a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about Social Security. So we may have covered this on the show before when we talked a little bit about Social Security, and I think we might have. But I think the big question overall is, if we continue to run these deficits for the next 10, 15, 20 years, what does that really mean for Social Security? What does that really mean for Medicare, for Medicaid? Are those programs in jeopardy?
Yeah.
Are they at risk?
Yeah, I certainly think so. Right. We've already talked about, so 2031, 2033, we talked about before, the trust fund that a portion of Social Security is paid out of is projected to basically run dry, right? And really, they haven't talked about adding more to the trust fund, protecting it more. So again, it's about 15% of what Social Security pays out. So, could we see a reduced benefit of maybe 15%? That's something into consideration right now, right? But when you've got a projection that would tell you that the interest you pay on your debt is going to far exceed what you pay for Medicare, what you're paying out for Social Security, what you pay for your national defense, what you pay to protect your own country.
That's a good point.
Right?
Yeah.
That's going to put pressure on a budget. It really is.
That's a good point, because what I was just about to say is, when you, as a government, when most of our budget is going towards interest, it actually makes it more difficult for politicians and lawmakers to borrow in times of emergency. So the odds are that we're going to be spending more in interest payments than we will on national defense by 2025.
Yep.
So we'll spend more in interest than we'll spend on building our ships, building our planes, paying our men and women in uniform. We spend about $800 billion, but in a few years, our interest expense will be more than $800 billion potentially, with where rates are headed. So we'll be spending more on interest payments than our own military. And this is where I think it's a big challenge, because geopolitically, I think China's a very big risk. And if you look at what the Chinese government is doing, what the Communist Party is doing, they're building their military along the Taiwan Strait. They're putting more resources into there. For all intents and purposes, it looks like war is brewing in that, whether we like it or not. And that is why it's hard for us sometimes as Americans to think that war could ever be a possibility here close at home. And so, we can spend on social welfare and spend on all these programs, but sadly, I hope we never have to wake up and realize that if we have a geopolitical risk and a geopolitical event, if we are so handcuffed and strapped from a spending standpoint, and that we can't spend effectively in these areas, that's another real risk for the market and for the U.S. market, and really for the world economy as well.
It does.
So.
It does. You've got these different events that are going to put pressure on budgets, put pressure on projections. And so I think that's where we're really going to see some kind of what I'll call creative tax law changes come about, right? Apart from just your income tax rate increasing there.
So I don't know if you've got any, just so if you're listening and you say, David, well, what are some of the things that I can be doing or should I be thinking about when it comes to taxes? Whether you're young, where should you be putting money in, IRA versus Roth? If you're closer to retirement, what should you be doing? Maybe we can cover on that as we...
Yeah, I mean, if you're listening out there, you're young, all contributions to start with 100% to a Roth account, right? If your employer offers a Roth 401k type account, I would recommend starting your contributions there. If your employer doesn't offer a Roth plan, contribute up to your max, whatever your company may match, right? But then after that, consider putting money towards a Roth IRA.
Can you make too much money? Is there a point where if you're making enough money that you shouldn't put money in a Roth? Not that you can't, but that you shouldn't.
Yeah, if your income is eligible to contribute to a Roth, no matter really what you make, I would consider it. So when you're under an employer-sponsored plan, there's no income limits to contribute to that, right? You can make $400,000, $500,000 for a 401k, right? But if your employer doesn't offer some type of Roth 401k plan, then yes, you can earn too much to where you can't contribute to a Roth IRA.
You're a doctor making $400,000 a year, and you have a Roth 401k option. You would say even at a $400,000 tax bracket, still contribute to a Roth 401k.
I would. David, tell me, would you rather pay tax on your seed or the harvest?
Yep, and by that you mean
right. Every dollar that you put into a Roth IRA is you're coming in taxable, right? You have to pay taxes on what you put in, right? But after that, all of your earnings don't grow tax deferred; they grow tax free, right? So if you put in $10,000 a year, right, that $10,000 over a 20, 30, 40-year time horizon, it could be $50,000, $100,000, $1 million.
So
right?
I pay tax on the 10,
right?
If it grows to 100,000,
no
I don't
taxes.
pay. No pay. So the majority of that all comes out tax free.
All tax free.
Whereas a regular 401k or an IRA, I don't pay taxes on the 10.
I might get a tax deduction for my $10,000 I put in, which let's say you're in an effective 20% tax rate. Okay, great. You just saved $2,000 in taxes. That's great. I love that, right? But if that same 10,000 grows to 100,000, well, now you owe income tax on that extra $90,000.
Which is just great. It's a great deal for the government, which is why.
Great deal.
So I would.
It really goes back to when the 401k was invented, right? How it was sold to the American people. We were in a high tax environment then. So it was great. Hey, get a tax deduction for all your contributions now. And then hopefully in 20, 30 years when you have to pull out income, you're in a lower tax bracket. That's a great system for it. We just talked about we're not in historically a high tax environment right now. Quite the opposite. We're in historically a very low tax environment right now. So the system isn't working as it was originally sold.
Yeah,
really.
That's right. So as a business owner, you can put money in a SEP IRA. There was 1 year that I put money in a SEP IRA and I needed a deduction and I put money in a SEP IRA and I've yet to put any more money in a SEP IRA. 100% of my retirement contributions go into a Roth 401k.
That's right.
And I try to do my best if I can max it out. And again, why is it? Because I'd rather pay taxes just on the seed amount, the small amount that I'm putting in there, and not pay any tax if it grows to $1 million, $2 million, but whatever the number is down the road.
Right.
That all comes out tax-free.
Tax-free.
So if you're young, really, probably any age, but now as you get closer to retirement or you're in retirement, you may not be working for an employer anymore. You may not be eligible for Roth contributions.
Right. We've talked about Roth conversions before. Right? Because we're still in a low tax environment. In retirement, you could very well likely be in a low tax environment as well. And so that's where you can't contribute to Roth IRAs anymore, but you can convert your 401ks, your pre-tax IRAs into a Roth IRA. So let's pay taxes now. So you don't always want to do it all at once. You typically want to structure it over a couple year period. But that is a great option as well to help protect you from what we would call tax risk, right? I expect taxes to go up about 15% here in 2026. That's almost assuredly going to happen. The question is, do taxes go up higher than that? David, you and I talk a lot about it. I'm of the mind taxes very likely will go up higher than that at some point in the next 10 to 15 years.
Yep.
Right?
Well, and along with what you're saying, I was just reading this number. We talked about those making more than $400,000 to balance the budget. Only from those households making $250,000 or more.
Yeah.
So again, 400 may be unreachable but what if you're a household that makes $250,000? So what if husband and wife both working, you both make $125,000 a year?
Yeah.
So you're at a $250,000 household level. That would require, this is just insane. It would require a 90% effective tax rate.
Yeesh.
For those making more than $250,000 a year, 90% top tax bracket. So again, the only way to either balance the budget is to cut spending, or which it's going to be near impossible because of just what Medicare, Social Security, defense, or you raise taxes by 90% for those making above $250,000. And again, that is what I think the point that I want to drive home. We can't raise taxes high enough on the wealthy. So if that's your argument of, well, hey, in order for us to fix everything, just raise taxes on the rich, it sounds good. But when you actually look at the math just doesn't work. Who are they coming after in order to balance the budget or to pay for this $32.5 trillion debt? They're coming after you. They're coming after the middle class. They're coming after the 90% of hardworking Americans. That's really where they're going to get their tax revenue from.
Yeah. I think so as well.
So again, this is why I felt like it was a good time to sound the alarm. Sadly, $32.5 trillion. One thing that is somewhat depressing too, you can fast forward the debt clock. This is depressing. Any guesses on where you think the next, so 2027, so we're at $32 trillion today. Any idea where we'll be in 4 years? Any guesses? We're at 32 today. So in 4 years,
maybe 38.
$43.5 trillion.
Wow.
So in 4 years, $43.5 trillion is where and you ready for this? This is the first time I'm seeing this. Interest on the debt, $2.2 trillion. So we'll spend $900,000 on defense, but we'll spend $2.2 trillion on interest on our debt. That's almost 2.5 times what we spend in defense spending. This is insane. So again, I don't sound like a broken record. Taxes are going higher. If you're not doing something right now to reduce your tax liability in the future, I think a large part of your wealth could get eaten up to taxes. So this is why maybe in a few episodes we can talk about how real estate investing could be a great way with depreciation to reduce your tax liability. Roth conversions, if you're approaching retirement or in retirement, can be a great way to reduce your tax liability. But if you're young, if you're 50 or younger, 55 or younger, maybe 16 younger and still working, again, this is not a blanket recommendation. You got to make sure it meets the needs and goals of your own specific situation. But I would strongly consider making the majority of your retirement contributions going into a Roth IRA.
I'm with you.
So,
yep.
Awesome.
All right, David.
Well, that was a quick episode, but one I just wanted to point out about just what to be expecting going forward. Sadly, where our national debt is sitting today, I've said it and I'll say it again. Me and my wife have 3 beautiful kids, and we want to always leave a brighter future for our kids. For many of our podcast listeners who have kids and grandkids, our goal as good parents and good stewards and just Americans should want to be to leave a country that's brighter for our children. Sadly, the route that we're going down, I think, does not give them a brighter future. And so I would encourage you, let your politicians know that we want balanced budgets and that we want to try to reduce spending and try to keep tax rates at a level that really Americans can still thrive and the economy can grow and it's not a burden to growing GDP in this country. So again, thanks for tuning in for the Retire Ready podcast. We hope you have a great week, and we'll be right back here next week, or I should say in a couple weeks for another episode. So thank you guys for joining us and have a great week.
Awesome.